It really is hard to believe that it's 7 years since I talked about foreskins. It came from Ali. She'd introduced me to a fellow sexological bodywork trainee called Philippe, who'd done a great deal of research into the value of the foreskin. And as something impacting me personally, what he shared was, quite frankly, mind-blowing. And I was confounded by the question, but why don't people know this? And so I was motivated to overcome my fear of public speaking, share what I'd learned from him. And that same ethos has driven all of my talks, a range of topics that feel important both personally and also for the collective, yet few people seem to be talking about. And this talk is both the same and different. It's the same because it's about something transformative that I'm deeply engaged with at the moment. And ironically, given everybody's mentioned it so far this evening, I thought it needed to be talked about more. And different because Ali's always been really quite enthusiastic about my topics. But she wasn't. She couldn't have been less so. There's just so much of it about, she said. We don't need to talk. So I really have felt very touched that she trusted me to persuade her otherwise. And I believe that an inherent need for deep connection is part of the human condition. But for much of my life, I was in denial of this. It just seemed like I had a natural ambivalence around most people. Then 18 years ago, my life changed when, in a state of overwhelm and desperation from my marriage breaking up, I started therapy. And my therapy experience was unusual. Because right from the start, something in me opened up. That evening, I found myself in a cafe, realizing I felt relaxed and happy in spite of all my woes. And for the first time in my life, I was looking around at strangers, relishing the prospect of making eye contact. Instead of feeling deeply uncomfortable, if they saw me, I would just smile. And I've had many ideas about what caused such a profound effect for me. But it's only while writing this talk that I realised the most significant, and in hindsight, obvious, was a shift in my nervous system. Through co-regulation with my therapist, my nervous system relaxed into a state of ease that was completely new to me. Sadly, it lasted but a few months. However, that experience of the real me was truly life-changing. So different from the shy self I was used to. I wanted to connect with everyone. I was a complete natural at talking to strangers. And it became my life goal to figure out how to spend as much of my time as possible in that state of being. Much later, I learned that connection and playfulness are only possible when the nervous system is relaxed enough and our social engagement system activates. This is also what makes deep sexual connection possible. Frankie, say relax, with good reason. But it took me many years to finally cotton on. You see, truly relaxing is impossible if your body doesn't know how. And 10 years ago, I learnt about the nervous system and its role in sexual pleasure on the sex pod training. But quite frankly, the practices we learnt did nothing for me. Slowly self-pleasuring while exploring faster or slower breathing was, at best, pointless, and at worst, a form of torture. My mind, and indeed my nervous system, wanted to rush to what I thought was the good stuff, escaping into fantasy and familiar arousal patterns. Putting that aside and sticking with the practice, I'd manage at most 10 minutes before collapsing with boredom. True story. And so, nervous system work was confined to the bin of the many practices that people raved about but didn't work for me. Until last year, I visited a specialist chiropractor for network spinal analysis. These days, I don't have much stress, yet still she could feel the accumulation of it in my nervous system from when I used to run on adrenaline. But what really got my attention was receiving my first adjustment. She lightly touched my spine near the neck and once again on my sacrum, and that was it. She knew just where to touch. My breathing immediately deepened, and I walked out of there with a huge sense of ease, feeling like I did all those years ago. Funnily enough, the train home was carnage. A cacophony of chatter, a screaming child, and a squeaky train wheel. A recipe for nervous system overload. But there I sat, chilled as fuck, savouring it all. However, it still took time to truly appreciate how much this very gentle working with my nervous system through the spine helped me to process deep emotions, release body tension, and improve my posture. Only then did it finally dawn on me that I needed to explore what I could do for myself to support my nervous system further. So I started to look at myself and the world through the lens of the nervous system. As a mind-based person, I've always found feeling into my body a bit vague, to be honest. But I discovered that I connect much more viscerally with the idea of feeling my nervous system than feeling my body. That might sound incredibly pedantic because it's basically the same thing, but for me, it's a very big deal. Most importantly, it became clear how directly the busyness of my mind was linked to the state of my nervous system. Relaxing is far more effective when I focus on being present with my nervous system instead of misguidedly somehow trying to quieten my wandering mind. Because primarily, the mind follows the nervous system and not the other way around. Whenever I stop and ask myself, what do I need right now? I have much more clarity, generally speaking, when I think in terms of what my nervous system needs. And crucially, that isn't always less stress and more relaxation. Sorry, Frankie. Many of you will know of polyvagal theory, but I'm a latecomer to the party. The key understandings are that there are three main branches to the nervous system, not two, and that we need very different things when each of the branches are activated. For me, the game changer has been learning what to do when I go into retreat and withdraw. Now, recently I was driving with my lovely partner and we had a big argument. For 45 minutes, we sat there in silence. I processed my hurt feelings, but I could still feel myself staying withdrawn. Fortunately, it was raining heavily, and I hit a patch of water, aquaplaning for several seconds. The resulting rush of adrenaline shifted my state instantly, and I began engaging with her as if nothing had happened. Now, I think I can get away with a small section of jargon without too many eye rolls from Ali, so I'm briefly going full geek. According to polyvagal theory, what happened was my dorsal vagal nerve went into shutdown, also known as hypoarousal. It got stuck there, as it painfully tends to do, until the skid activated a sympathetic stress response, taking me into the sympathetic state. Now from here, I effortlessly returned to ventral vagal and social engagement because my system is infinitely better at navigating that particular transition. Now, perhaps fortunately, the language doesn't actually matter, but what does is seeing the theory work in practice and that knowing that there are tools we can use to facilitate those shifts that we find difficult for ourselves when we recognize where we are. No skid required. This year has been full of other discoveries only possible through the nervous system lens. Yet again, I've kept asking myself, how did I not know this? While stuck in a place of deep existential despair, I noticed myself sitting up straighter, and suddenly I felt so much more resourced. There was still a huge amount of grief that I was sitting with, but underneath it, I now felt absolutely fine. I was no longer overwhelmed. And experiencing such a direct and marked effect on my emotional state was far more impactful than all the times I've been told good posture matters. Did you know that gently stroking someone's spine can have a profound effect? A friend described it to me as like taking drugs. I've learned to love receiving it too, and find it's a beautiful way of creating safety during foreplay. Pro tip, try licking. At heart, sex is two, and sometimes more, nervous systems meeting. So why not befriend your partners as well as your own? We can discover resources we never knew we had because we simply weren't looking for them. I learned that just thinking about eye contact immediately settles my system. And that still makes me smile. One of the payoffs from the improvement in my nervous system is that I can now fall asleep while cuddled up. I love doing so, but it had always seemed impossible because I'd needed to separate in order to nod off. But the big payoff came recently at a well-known local tantra massage training. And shout out here to John and everyone else from TTM in the room. We were helped to connect to greater sensitivity in our genitals. For the first time, I was able to experience sustained pleasure from subtle sensation alone while staying fully present. There was no goal, no following of well-worn paths to arousal, and no escaping into story in my head. There was no unconscious contracting of pelvic muscles to intensify the arousal. There was just finding deliciousness in sensations I'd habitually pushed aside in my rush to get somewhere else. This was the opening of the door I'd been looking for, in vain, for so long. In the bedroom, it translates into more presence during sex. Slow, goalless, connected sex, not trying to get anywhere other than feeling the sensations and my partner. Sex that feels consistently sustainable rather than the roller coaster of chasing arousal and dopamine. Less intensity, more sensitivity. Nurturing, life-affirming sex. Welcome to the Pleasure Dome. We're on our way home.